When Joseph Merrick started to develop a trunk on his face, he gained notoriety. But his tale is very far from being over. The Elephant Man was the headliner of the so-called freak shows that were popular in the Victorian era, and was the major attraction at sideshows in London because of his trunk-like facial growth, twisted spine, and massive malformed cranium. Merrick's tale is arguably the most distressing of all the persons paraded on stage as part of the performances, even though the majority of them had horrific stories of abandonment, homelessness, and infirmity. Merrick suffered scoliosis from an early age, as well as cranial bone overgrowth, skin that protruded from his face, and an enlarged right arm. Due to the skin on his face, he earned the nickname the Elephant Man. People began to perceive Merrick as a monster and a danger to society because of his facial abnormalities. However, the reverse was true. With the exception of a few people who made an effort to assist him, he was described as a nice and lovely man attempting to survive in a society that didn't care about him. Since his passing, Merrick has been the subject of intriguing posthumous stage and cinema performances that explore the man who was confined inside a disfigured body due to his significant abnormalities. The closest portrayal of Merrick's life is credited to David Lynch's 1980 film Elephant Man, which stars John Hurt as Merrick and allows us to catch a glimpse of the man's tender heart despite having been mercilessly called a monster. With the finding of Merrick's burial in the same cemetery as two of Jack the Ripper's victims last month, there is now an additional cause to commemorate him 129 years after his passing. More than a century after he passed away, authorities in the UK erected a plaque at the recently discovered grave. On April 24, 1890, Merrick's remains were laid to rest. Before Johann Vigor-Mungovan, author of Joseph, The Life, Times and Places of the Elephant Man, had located them in the London cemetery, their exact location was unknown. His narrative continues today. Born on August 5, 1862, before his lips started to expand at age 21 months, Joseph Merrick was an unharmed infant. Then a bony bump appeared on his forehead and developed over the next few days. He also gained weight, and his facial skin grew incredibly loose. By the time he was 5 years old, he was displaying increasingly severe malformations. His right arm was at least twice as big as his left arm, and his feet were both abnormally enormous and shaped. His skin became thicker as he aged, and he sprouted many sizable growths on various places of his body. When Merrick was a young boy, he was informed that his condition was brought on by his mother Mary Jane being terrified of an elephant she had seen at a fairground when she was expecting. Merrick has been diagnosed with Proteus syndrome, a rare disease that causes both bone and skin overgrowth, as well as 2 other medical issues. Another hypothesis holds that he had neurofibromatosis, a hereditary condition that results in tumors on nerve tissues that migrate to the brain and spine. The loss of Merrick's cherished mother Mary Jane was among the worst things that might have occurred to him. When Merrick was just 11 years old, she died of pneumonia, and he was believed to be distraught. 3 other kids had passed away before Merrick was born, and Mary Jane herself had a disability. When Merrick's father, Joseph, remarried, his new stepmother requested that the boy drop out of school at age 13 and get a job since she didn't want him in the house. The disabled guy had a terrible upbringing. He was able to work at a cigar shop despite his worsening abnormalities, but it became too challenging for him to roll cigars with his big right hand. In order for the youngster to sell gloves door to door, his father set up a hawker's license. He failed to generate any money since potential consumers were put off by his appearance. The child was reportedly beaten by Joseph Sr. if he returned home empty-handed. Until the boy had earned enough money to cover his living expenses, his stepmother would withhold all meals from him. He frequently fled his house since he was so unhappy there. He was fortunate to have one kind person in his life, his uncle Charles Merrick, who allowed him to live with him and sought to support him in running his glove-selling business. But after a few years, his license was cancelled because clients were afraid of him. Merrick was compelled to enter the notorious Leicester workhouse at the age of 17 since he had no other way to sustain himself. A notorious Victorian institution for the impoverished and downtrodden was the workhouse system. Even for the physically fit, it was an unpleasant place to be and unspeakably cruel. Merrick was made to live in a place that was considered a hellhole for 5 years. The teen was anxious to leave the workhouse, according to Steve Moore, who oversees Merrick's bones at Queen Mary University of London. He thought joining the circus was the only option to get money because it was so unpleasant. He reached out to entertainer Tom Norman and traveled to London to appear in his weird performances, according to Moore. The question of whether Norman was abusing or exploiting Merrick has generated a lot of discussion. Merrick was a successful actor in the shows, but Norman was more successful. Regardless of the facts, Merrick never knew freedom. Merrick managed to educate himself to read and write, dispelling the initial perception that he had a mental disability. But because of his facial abnormalities, he was mute. The young man was compelled to endure the most terrifying circumstances. He once spent a terrible British winter sleeping in a shop with just a single flame for heat while living alone. He had no one to assist him and was unable to eat because of his facial abnormalities. Just imagine the type of stuff he would have consumed and the difficulty he would have had while doing so. The frustration would have driven you or me crazy, Moore remarked. Numerous Londoners flocked to freak shows in the middle and late 1800s to gaze at those whom contemporary society had shunned. The Siamese twins, the bearded ladies, the crippled, the overweight, the tall, and the bearded women. However, no performer was as astonishing as the Elephant Man on stage. The only thing that made him look like an elephant was the skin that stuck out from his face like a trunk, despite claims that he was half man, half elephant. Merrick became more and more out of shape, and he flaunted it on stage. He was now a major freak show sensation. But his health was deteriorating quickly. Merrick, who ran the sideshow, resided close to the London hospital and, fortunately, caught the eye of Dr. Frederick Treves, who was curious about the Elephant Man and requested permission to examine Merrick's body. Merrick concurred, and Treves saw that Merrick had extremely severe abnormalities, including bony protrusions, soft tissue swellings that covered much of his body, and physical and psychological agony. His leg had gotten so bad that he could only walk with a cane, and his body was covered with tumors. Merrick would always wear a cape and hood when he went outside in an effort to hide from onlookers' eyes. From his interaction with Merrick, Treves learned that the young man was a survivor and someone to be admired. Even when the freak show left London and relocated to Belgium, Treves continued to keep in touch with Merrick. But compared to London, life in Belgium was far worse. In addition to being robbed and left homeless in a foreign nation where he knew no one, Merrick's new boss abandoned him. He was able to return to England and visit Dr. Treves, the only person he thought actually cared about him. Merrick's condition had gotten worse by the time he was 24, and Treves made sure he could stay at the hospital. He also established a fund so that others may contribute to the specialized medical care he needed. Merrick had visits from a number of well-known theatre actors during the 4 years he remained in the London hospital, eager to show their support for the guy so many people had used as entertainment. By that time, the general public had changed its mind about freak exhibitions, viewing them as superfluous and cruel. In his hospital bed, Merrick passed away on April 11, 1890. His neck was dislocated as a result of trying to sleep while lying down on his bed, which led his head to fall at an awkward angle. Asphyxia was listed as the death's official cause of death. At least his final 4 years were believed to have been tranquil and comfortable, even though the majority of Merrick's 27 years of existence were marked by cruelty and terrible treatment.